we move on to Dr. Robert Ochola, the Director of Strategy and Innovation in AFREXIMBANK. Let's hear from you, please, on what the bank is doing, and also on the side what you think of all this as we go on. Please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Latif. I mean, I'm very, very excited to be part of this distinguished panel. When I received the topic, strategic growth and spread of startups in Africa, it was quite an exciting moment for me, because I had to go back to an experience 10 years ago where I was working in Kenya, and I was working for a mobile company at the time, Safaricom, and everybody knows about the big M-Pesa. And what got me concerned about this experience, which I think is what I built some of my thoughts around, was the fact that we did an ecosystem challenge where we brought in different people to solve some problems. We ran a hackathon, and every single sort of startup, this of course is purely on the tech space, the fintech space, was interested in solving a problem for M-Pesa. And I'm like, you know, if you've got 100 young people in the room and they're only focused on one aspect of the problems that exist on the continent and in the country specifically, I think we have a problem. Therefore, when I was putting this presentation together, three things sort of ran through. And I'm very happy to actually go after Dr. Khalid, who talked about scale, because I believe that we need to scale. You need to put into place ideas and help the startup community solve big problems with scale, but also based on heavy research. And I think that's where the link between corporates, university, and the startup community needs to be harmonized. I think there's a big opportunity there, so that you stop people sort of going with what I call a fad, where there's an exciting activity and everybody jumps into it. And that's the example I gave of everybody trying to solve the next big thing for M-Pesa. That's one area. The networking and partnerships, I think this is also critical, because you don't want to be in a situation where it's who you know that allows you to scale or succeed. You need to make sure the ecosystem is created in such a way that there is some element of fairness. So you don't need to know somebody to be able to succeed in this area, because, you know, with the youth world that we have on the continent, you must make sure that every single player, every single youth, every single startup has the same opportunity regardless of their high-level contacts. So I think that's the next piece. And then the third piece, I think, is of course to unlock funding, debt, equity, but of course in a structured manner. So I sort of put my thoughts, therefore, around these three sort of elements. But let me take you back, because I think DNA is important. And sometimes we forget on this great continent that we come from a very, very strong heritage. I've been in Egypt now for 5 years, and some of the phenomenal pieces of engineering that I've seen sort of make me very excited. So I think we must go back and ask ourselves, you know, because sometimes we forget that when you look back at the history of Africa in totality, we have the DNA for unlocking opportunity, especially with regards to innovation, technology, and networking. So I thought I'd put that up as a first element. The second element, I think, is we have a tailwind, and this piece by Shakespeare's Julius Caesar sort of captures it. He says that you know, there's a tide where if you catch the tide at the right time, you know, you can move and scale. However, if you miss it, you know, you will lose your ventures. And this initial quote from Julius Caesar I found quite inspiring. So allow me to just take a broad overview first of the global landscape. And I think we know this, but it's important sometimes to just repeat ourselves. When we look at the global landscape, there's sort of about 615 unicorns. And when you look at North America, you look at Asia Pacific, they are way ahead, leading the charge. Europe, of course, has 61, and then usually bundle Middle East and Africa together at almost 20 times less than what you're seeing out there in North America and Asia. and Latin America, of course, at 11. And therefore, we must ask ourselves a few questions. What are they doing right? And what are the things that we need to take and localize to unlock the opportunity for the continent in totality? When you look at scale in terms of the sizes, 31 billion with 5.7 billion raised for US 14 unicorns. China 96.4 billion with 9.4 billion raised, but for 8 unicorns. And the rest of the world is sitting at about 11.5 billion with 1.7 billion raised and only 5 unicorns. I think it presents a challenge, but it also presents a massive opportunity. In my line of work as the Director of Strategy and Innovation for AFREXIMBANK, we obviously deal with bigger ticket transactions, so anything from $5 million going up. So the only way we intermediate with the SME and startup community is through financial institutions, other banks. So we'll give a line of credit to them and hope they unlock the opportunity. So I went back and looked at the case studies that exist from India, and I found a very interesting point. And I think, the first speaker spoke about policy, and in India, they have a definition for startup. We will need to ensure we unlock our own definition, because annual turnover of less than $3.1 million, $3.4 million, sorry, would be too high for some of our markets. But I think we would need to go and unlock that. Headquarters, I think we need to look at the continent in totality, especially as we look at the opportunities that come up next year from the AFCFTA. But India created a startup India initiative that was done at a Departmental of Industrial Policy and Promotion. And what happened therefore is the states took, and the different unions and territories came across and introduced their own startup policies that sort of follow on the government initiatives. And even despite the challenges of demonetization which took place in 2016, they still were able to improve the ease of doing business. And when you look at some of the numbers, numbers of MSMEs with $36.39 million, that's not bad. And then the market, so the GDP share of MSMEs at 28.9%, which I think is also fairly important. And a lot of that is actually in the trade area. It's also important to get some sound bites so we can benchmark. It's important to know what some of the challenges are, and some of the international data tells us 90% of new startups fail. When everybody has been talking about ByteDance, of course, we're valued at 75 billion. When you look at the UK as an example, 65% of adults want to start their own business, so they're looking at the conducive environment. When you look at 2019, Berlin, of course, was ranked the best city in the world for startups. When you look at the median sort of salary for self-employed individuals in the US, $50,000 a year. And what I found also very interesting was that 1/3 of small businesses in the US started with less than $5,000. I think that's quite telling, and I think it speaks directly to the point again, if I borrow from Dr. Khaled, where he says money is important, but they are talking about big sums of money to sort of ignite and shift the landscape. I went back and looked at the African scenario, and I found a couple of things that we all know, but allow me just to repeat them. Time required for setting up businesses. I think in certain countries like Rwanda, you find that you can set up a business in a couple of hours. In other countries, it can take up to 3-4 weeks to do so. The ease of doing business is fundamental. The number of procedures for businesses that need to go through is also critical, and also the cost of a business. And finally, some of the distribution milestones of pre-seed founders sometimes actually stall and create hurdles for startups to sort of expand and grow. I call this the good and the bad. And the reason why is when you look at, again, I'll zoom into Nigeria as a case study on this occasion, where 84% of startups reported disruptions in their funding efforts. And 79% of startups have less than 6 months buffer and only 6% have a cash runway of between 13 to 25 months, which I think is really the sweet spot. Because beyond that, if you have anything less than that, the challenge is you don't have enough capital, and you may not be able to have at least 18 months to 24 months to achieve the basic growth patterns. But when you look at the picture on the right, you do see a couple of startups which have done pretty well. I know a few of these, but I can tell you one of the things that cuts across most of these is the fact that they were networked. A lot of money coming into this is actually coming in from foreign entities. BitPesa is a case in point. Twiga is another one. Flutterwave as well. So these to me are some of the areas we must unlock so that we actually start building from the continent going up. There is a good story though. I mean, there's a couple of different players who are trying to unlock the venture capital and private equity space on the continent. We're seeing some of our partners like First Bank of Nigeria with a first fund. We've got Gold Venture, you've got Jacana Partners. All of these are beginning to sort of create the right venture VC and PE activities to try and unlock, but there's still a big opportunity to play in this space. And a lot of these guys actually play in the later stages. They don't actually do, and this is to the next point I'm making, angel investment and of course VC funding. And when you look at this comparison between Ghana and Silicon Valley, you find that a lot of the Ghanaian startups, and I think this holds true for the whole of Africa, are actually getting their funding from self or family, with a few accelerators, but you'll find that the level of VC and angel investors is extremely low. And I think this is an area where we need to take some learnings from and of course unlock, because when you're able to get funding from self or family, again, that cuts out a massive opportunity for various people who may not have a similar level of contacts. There are some winners, and this is an example of one company where they're doing some stuff in the energy space, and they were able to unlock $3.3 million of Series A equity financing for their first round. So that is a recent example. So here's where I thought I'd spend some of my time in saying, how does an entity like AFREXIMBANK, how do we unlock and partner with different entities and university tertiary educations, and also get some contact with the startup community. And I wanted to present a couple of thoughts on this, because here's the reality. Again, I used a case study only because the data was available. But if you imagine that Silicon Valley, 36% of startups actually do try and target the big enterprises. In Ghana and most of Africa, it's 20%. I think that's a small amount. So for me, I believe if you're talking about scale, a lot of what you're doing should try and focus on that big networking opportunity from big companies, because from that you have enough money to develop research, you have enough money to develop data, and hopefully your flight plan will allow you to scale not just within one African country, but across the continent, because that's where I believe GDP of over 2.5 trillion, if you can unlock an opportunity that can target that, especially with the existing environment, which is harmonizing and bringing down the borders for trade across the continent, we have a very big opportunity to unlock that ecosystem. So the bank at the moment has 4 strategic pillars. One of the strategic pillars is intra-African trade. And if we were to say that we need to have a very clear strategic plan that says we want to develop startups that will focus on unlocking opportunity for intra-African trade. The opportunity exists. Today, intra-African trade is sitting at 15%, and it has been plateaued at that for almost 7 or 8 years. So we have enough data that says if we can come in and as big organizations that so the big corporates on the continent and say, here are some fundamental big challenges that need to be resolved, and we present this to a proper entity that can then decipher that and push it down to startup communities, let's solve some of the issues. And this is a very good example of one which has scale. The demographics on the continent strong, and they continue to look very positive. The middle of the pyramid, according to AFDB, over the next sort of 14 or so years, 20 or so years, will grow. And you're going to have that grow from 330 million to almost 1 billion, which is a big opportunity for any startup who wants to solve a problem for the consumer market. So that consumer market is growing. When you look at demographics, also in terms of the youth bulge, that continues to be a big advantage. So these are basically inflection points that we must use from a high-level perspective to create business opportunities for the startups to unlock. We talk about the challenges of trade and infrastructure, but what are the ideas that can still, even within the continent today, where even though we have poor infrastructure, that same infrastructure is unlocking $1 trillion of trade, but most of that trade is coming from outside the continent. So how do we use some of our initiatives to tell the startup community, here are some big challenges again for how we can create logistics and also solutions to then take one entity from one African country with the breaking down of the barriers, breaking down of trade barriers, and make sure that they have now access to other African markets. We have, the situation has been enhanced, and we should also look at unlocking those opportunities. There's some research that we did, and we found that today, a lot of African entities are importing huge amounts of their requirements, livestock, mining, minerals, foodstuff from outside the continent. If we were to just change the direction of trade and say, listen, the thing that you bought from Italy or Belgium, right? So Nigeria actually imports leather, and Mauritius from Italy and Belgium. The same quality of leather is available in South Africa and Botswana. So if we were to just point the direction of trade, we can actually increase intra-African trade from 15 to 38%. This is a big opportunity. How do we unlock some of those opportunities and say, listen, can we get startups to now focus on some of these challenges to help resolve these big issues? I think you can get scale. Here are a couple of other things. We held the first intra-African trade seminar, fair, sorry, in Cairo in 2018, massive opportunity for networking. And this brought in buyers and sellers from across the continent. So these are networking opportunities which exist. And if we can also ensure that next time we do such an event, we do ensure that some of the startup community are part of it and they form part of the ecosystem so that we can sort of unlock some of the issues. Here are some other big areas for me, which I think are big opportunities to get the startup community involved. Payments, inter-regional payments, promotion of standardization, focus on export and industrialization, and also strengthening of African multinationals. If you get the big, what we call inter-African champions, the El Swidis, the Dangotes of this world, to say, we need you to deliberately put in place policies, enable an enabling environment so that we can get some of the startup communities to supply you and be part of your ecosystem and value chain so that you can scale. This to me is also a very clear roadmap for success. As we're looking at all those, we must not also ignore some tailwinds, because I believe in technology, you must also use certain tailwinds that are already in play. So here are a couple of tailwinds, AI and machine learning. Everybody is clear about some of the opportunities there. Amazon, who continue to scale, are now even looking at becoming a bank. Whether they will do that is still up for discussion. But basically, these are various tailwinds that they're using. Internet of Things. One of the startups I mentioned to you in South Africa has based their businesses around Internet of Things. How do we help them do that? I mentioned real-time payments, which has a massive scale. When you look at this specific image, you have no activity in the real-time payment space in Africa, right? So quite a bit of it, of course, in Europe, in the US, a lot in Asia, and also Australia, but absolutely no activity in this area. So for me, it's very important for us to drive a very cohesive and deliberate process where we bring together experts and we put together big problems which have been well researched, and see how to partner. And therefore, what I've done here is try to hypothesize and propose a blueprint for success. And it's based on 4 key sort of areas. I think this policy intervention, where VC companies must be introduced and also make sure that they don't necessarily only get used to people who they believe, but they have a massive opportunity to sort of introduce themselves to the bigger community. And therefore, we need some very clear policy interventions around that area. We must democratize data, because what we don't want to do is get to situations where if you are not in the know, because you don't have the required knowledge or networks, you fall outside the ecosystem. We need to make sure the ecosystem is standard, is balanced. We need to localize the approach. When we have various people presenting to us, a lot of the templates that they use do not actually have any solid pitch books that exist and are localized to the African context. So again, there's elements of capacity building, outreach, so that we can actually ensure that the information to the startups is fit for purpose. And of course, it's unfortunate that we cannot ignore it. You cannot do this without unlocking the money. We see some activities that are required in the VC angel investment base. From the debt side, I think there are a couple of opportunities there, equity side, but all these are sort of later stage. What we need to do is try and be very prescriptive around unlocking early stage financing. The bank, just by way of concluding, has got an equity investment, but again, it's still at a later stage. We don't get involved in VC funding, but we're beginning to think around how to do that, because we believe that this is one of the criteria that we would need to unlock the opportunity for financing, especially for the startup community. And as I close, I'll just leave you with a quote from Steve Jobs. Thank you very much, Dr. Latif. I'll yield back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Robert, for a very interesting presentation, and for giving us also the elements of the Africa Startup Blueprint. And I guess with GF, you're starting to have an idea on how you get into the venture capital thing, the involvement in the investment of the companies. Next, we have Ms. Sherine Shohdy, Country Coverage Director, Egypt CDC Group. Please.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you very much. I've been experiencing some difficulties with the internet connection, so I found it to be a bit easier to turn off the video. It saves a bit on bandwidth. So if that's okay, I do apologize in advance.
No, that. We'd love to see your pretty face, but that's fine.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I'm trying to bring it back, but the bandwidth is kind of funny. I mean, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm very much honored to be amongst this very renowned panelists, and thank you for all the conversations that have been happening. And I think it's very detailed and very interesting what we're all trying to do in supporting SMEs and trying to support new companies as they grow and expand into Africa. And I would agree, of course, with everybody's perspective on the opportunities and how much potential there is across Africa. Just to give us a brief for those who don't know, and just to introduce who we are. So CDC is the UK's development finance institution. We're the world's first development finance institution, and we have been investing in Africa for over 70 years, I would say. We've recently opened up our office, so I'm a new joiner to CDC for the past 3 months, and we're establishing local presence in Egypt, given the opportunity and given the market space that we think is full of potential. Specifically for Egypt, we've decided to actually have a local ground presence. We also have local ground presence across Africa, which gives us a lot of strength in what we do in Africa. Generally, we look to be very innovative in the way we use our capital to be able to reach all sizes of businesses, and we have different ways of investing and committing our capital, basically to build commercial and sustainable businesses and to invest to create more of development impact. So development really is at the core of what we do, and having an impact and impact really lies within our framework of every investment decision we take. We provide different investment solutions, which basically spans over debt and equity. And basically from debt and equity, we can get as creative as can be in terms of different structures and tenors. And we also invest across a very broad range of sectors. So we look at financial institutions, agribusiness, food, manufacturing, healthcare, consumers and business services, infrastructure, pharmaceuticals, etc. So we tend to be a very flexible investor, and at the same time, our capital is very much long-term, which I believe is exactly what the SMEs and the startups would need. So we're not the typical investor that would be pressured by a timeline for exit. On the contrary, we're very much flexible. We tend to pick our partners very closely and very diligently, and we very much invest in the management team as well, which we believe are the best suited to manage their business. But rather, we just provide the support in terms of opening up new markets, opening up opportunities, sharing our experience and our knowledge, and watching these businesses as they grow. So our model has always been based on partnerships, I would say, and with management teams and interesting businesses. The company gets to employ, host governments, development finance partners, and private sector co-investors. So these are the kind of partnerships we tend to like to work with through direct debt and through the direct equity model. I think basically we are very serious about Africa. And I think one of the key differentiators for us is basically that we know Africa very well. I think over the past, 70 years, we've currently invested around $3 billion in 700 African companies. And we're also very committed and have announced recently that we commit to invest up to $4.5 billion in Africa by the end of next year. So Africa is on a top priority for us and is a focus continent for what we do. CDC in general is only focused on South Asia and Africa. These are the only two continents where we work and we operate, and we know these places very, very well. I think we've chosen to do more of what we know than try to spread ourselves too thin in doing too much of everything. Not to say that it's a wrong approach, but this is the approach that CDC has chosen for itself, coupled with the mandate of trying to really build impact and development. Egypt is also very exciting for us. Basically, we look at it as an entrepreneurial hub within Africa, and we tend to find a lot of opportunities for, similar to what Mr. Khaled was saying and Dr. Mohamed was saying, is that there's a lot of opportunities for SMEs to actually grow and expand beyond Egypt, exploring more into the African markets. And we believe our local presence here will allow us to tap into these potential businesses, and with our local presence across Africa and our reach as well would help us enable that unlocking of cross-border business and unlocking the opportunity for these companies to grow more into Africa. A lot of the times, even though for us to even expand our reach even further, not just do we do the direct debt and the direct equity investments, but we also invest through funds. So we have a number of funds where we are invested in here in Egypt, the likes of Izdihar and Sawari Ventures. We're looking at other funds, obviously GIF is amongst the list, is in terms of selecting the funds that actually have a wider reach and would be able to access much smaller companies that we may not be able to access directly, whether because of the challenge of size or the challenge of where they are throughout their business cycle. But we actually be able to tap into our funds and have our funds increase our reach to those smaller size enterprises. I'm very mindful on time and being able to.
I think we can move on and then return to her if she has some additional final comments, because technology plays games with us all the time. We now move on to His Excellency Dr. Labarang, Ambassador of Cameroon to Egypt and Dean of the African. You are actually the most important. You are representing politically the countries in the continent. How does it feel to see all this, these initiatives, all these institutions that are trying to help entrepreneurs? How do you perceive it from the country's point of view? How do you comment on all this? Plus, of course, whatever it is that you have in mind. I had to throw in that question. Please.
Thank you for giving me the floor. I would like to thank you to have given us this opportunity to look into this matter with you. First of all, I would like to really thank Dr. Ochola for what he said. You know, in fact, he did say most of the things that I wanted to say. But sometimes when we, sometimes when we look at those things, you know, we tend to forget that the whole environment is, you know, monitored and also has the impact of the government, you know, institutions that are in charge of those fields. When you speak about startups in Africa, people tend only to think about startups in fields of, let's say, technology, you know, communications, and which are the fields that, you know, most of the people that think of going into the startup, you know, they prefer. But the development of Africa has, you know, more of challenges. And those challenges need not only to be in those specific fields, but in fields that really need government to intervene. Because when you speak of startup, in much of our countries, these are not only the private sector. The governments have to come into play. And when they come into play, they have their priorities. And the priorities sometimes do not match with the funding that they have. So you have them, you know, saying that they are going to develop the startups. And those bankers and the financiers that are that come into play, for them, what they look at is what are the return, what is the, you know, the growth, and sometimes we get all confused in those things. So one thing is to speak about startups in Africa, and one thing is to speak about the, you know, the development of those startups in all the African countries. To look local, what are they going to do locally and to earn early, so that they can, you know, stabilize their finances and get now they will think about expanding. But when you come up with those, you know, projects like this one, when the banks and the financiers, they only, you know, are focusing on the expansion of startups, I think we need, we miss many things. So what we should do is not to forget that those, in most of our countries, startups are, you know, I would say, nurtured by the governments. And those governments, you know, the officials of those governments maybe do not have, you know, the perception that many of the people of the private sector do have. So they need also to be capacitated. You know, the building of capacity for those who are in charge of the nurturing and the monitoring of the startups in our country is very, very essential. So when I followed, you know, the Central Bank of Egypt, you know, and the representative, and also the Bank Minister, what they say is true. You know, they have, you know, they have had instructions to finance the SMEs, but in which field did they finance them? In the fields that are easy to be financed and for the return to be early, or in fields that really are priorities of governments. That's the reason why we thought ourselves as ambassadors in Egypt to take the opportunity to draw the attention of the, I would say, the partners on the fact that we should consider Africa as a whole. Considering Africa as a whole gives us this opportunity to think of the markets as a whole market that are conducive to developing, ventures that can develop early, but also in a meaningful way. So last year we came with an idea with my colleagues from the African Ambassadors Group to really present to the investors, to the financing community, what they think they can get in each one of our African countries, and they will see the problems are similar. Most of the problems are similar, and now the opportunities are also vast. How do we tap on that? Is only to, by trying to fine-tune the regulatory framework, and also to see what are the priorities. You can think of everything. All the experiences in the world can be, mirrored or try to be imported, but you need to be local, to look local before looking, wide. So this is the input that I wanted to bring in, that do not forget to capacitate the governments and the institutions that are in charge of developing the startups in our countries. And do not forget that our governments have priorities, and the priorities may not be the priorities of the private sector. So this is a very important issue that we need to address, and each of us should to have that behind our minds. And one of the issues also for the SMEs and the startups is the issue of guarantee, the collaterals. When they go on looking for funds, the funding, most of the things that they are, confronted with is the issue of collaterals. So how are we going to address this is also an issue that we need not forget. So I did not make a presentation because I thought that the technicalities and the bankers and everyone, they are better placed to do that. But I wanted to make those remarks just to draw attention of the importance not to forget that if you want to succeed, you need to also educate those in the government, in the public sector that are in charge of those SMEs and the startups in our countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Actually, your points are all spot on and very important. That's exactly what I expect from your side. How you feel about everything that you heard. That's the whole idea, because what you represent the stakeholders really of this whole thing, because the ultimate objective is the development of Africa. And what you said is that from between startups and development, there is a long way, and this long way involves a lot of things that we need to look at.